I think if God gives us something, we should use it. And it's easy for us to look out and think we need more people, we need more talented people, we need more resources, we need more money, we need more. Well, let's look at what we've got. What have you got in your hand? Let's use that.
Welcome, everyone. Today we are joined by David Kent. He is the Secretary-Treasurer of the UPCA, the United Pentecostal Church of Australia, which is an elected position, and he's also the Assistant Pastor of Calvary Chapel in Canberra. In our conversation, we talked about how he came to the Lord, his advice to young leaders, what churches get wrong about church administration, why administration is so important to the health of a church, and much more. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today, Brother Kent.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, it was great to see you at our yearly national conference. It's always a very busy time for you. You not only are the Secretary-Treasurer of the UPCA, but then you've been the conference coordinator, right, for the national conference for almost a decade.
Well, it just seems to landed in Canberra. And, it's actually quite a demanding task for the local church, not so much for me, but for all the volunteers and all the work. So we won't be sorry that we'll eventually move somewhere else. But we do don't get me wrong, we do like having it here, and it is a wonderful venue, and it was great to have it again after 3 years of not having it. And I think we saw that in the attendance, record registrations. It was an excellent conference. I was really happy with it.
Yeah, it truly was, and it was great seeing everyone after all of that time. You know, we had some national events, but they were youth-based or, ladies-based or whatever. This was the first time everyone was able to get together after, that long break, and it was really, really cool. And Canberra is just a great location. I mean, I know people... I know people don't get up for traveling to Canberra, but from my perspective, it's so easy to get around. And my wife and I, we discovered the scooters this year, so we really enjoyed
so did a lot of the youth. When I was walking around the city, nearly got run over by some of our youth.
So we really enjoyed that aspect, so we'll be disappointed if it ever comes to Sydney where it's banned and then we have to do more work. But well, thank you again for coming on. I like to start out these conversations by getting to know the guest a little bit, just for those who may not know you. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your background, where you come from, your worldview, that sort of thing. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm a rare breed of my generation. I was actually born and bred in Canberra, which is unusual for people of my vintage. Canberra really only started to grow as a city in like the 1970s, 60s and 70s. Before that, it was quite small. My parents were what they called 10-pound poms, where they used to, because after the Second World War, they were worried about Australia's not being very populated. We had, the threat of invasion, they thought, from the north, so they wanted to populate, and of course they wanted Europeans. So at that time, if you would agree to immigrate from England, you could bring your whole family for £10. Then they would put you up. When you got here, you'd have a job to go to, which you had to do for 2 years. And then that was it. You're free from your debt at that time. And I think Brother Bill Morris also was a 10-pound pom. I could be wrong, though. He wouldn't like being called a pom since he's Scottish. But my parents and my sisters emigrated here in 1953, I think it was, 1953. And my dad applied to go to Victoria, and they sent him to Canberra. He worked on a dairy farm here, and then after his 2 years of working on a dairy farm, he joined the ACT police, and he was his badge number was number 97, so he was one of the first 100 policemen in Canberra. Then my brothers and I were born here. And then my wife was also born here. She's a similar vintage to me, obviously, and she's also born and bred here, which is unusual.
When was because Canberra is like a created city? There was I might be making this up, but I feel like there was a bit of a tussle between Sydney and Melbourne, and then they decided
No,
to.
yeah, that's
Is
true.
that not true, or is it true?
That's true. Yeah,
Mm.
that's quite a common. It's common knowledge. If you go to the National Library, they have a lot of stuff on it. Melbourne, when Canberra became a nation on the 1st of January 1901, the regional parliament was in Melbourne, but they decided there was too much um, dispute between Sydney and Melbourne over where the capital was going to be, and so they decided that they had built a new one, and they sent out a search party to look at different places. One of the places they looked at was Port Macquarie, and I'm really upset that they
Oh.
didn't actually choose Port Macquarie. My cousin lives there, lovely
Yeah.
place. But
Yeah,
they
it's
decided
nice.
that they need to be a cold climate because people think better in a cold climate. Apparently,
Mm.
that's the reality. That's what the reason, and they also had to be far enough from the ocean that it couldn't be shelled from a
Huh.
ship, which is how they chose the limestone plains here in Canberra. And it was built 1913, 1926 it was named, I think.
Yeah.
And then they moved. It was still just a small town on either side of the river when I was growing up. But then in the 60s, the Prime Minister at the time, who was Robert Menzies, decided we needed to build the city, and he moved all the government departments, which were still in Melbourne, to Canberra, and that's when it really started to grow as a
Mm.
city at that time.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. The longer I live in Australia, that they would have put that amount of thought and planning into where they were placing it.
And it was a privileged city at first because it was a government um, project. Government owned everything, so that means with the lawn, all the nature strips were always mowed. There was never any rubbish around, and it was well laid out, and everybody had a quarter-acre block to
Mm.
live in the house and so on. But those days are long gone, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's very plain. Like you guys even had allocated. Is that right? You had allocated lots for different things like businesses,
Yeah,
churches.
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
all
and
the industrial areas were separate,
mm.
etc., etc. Yeah.
One of my favorite parts about Canberra is that they have the American embassy. So there's that little slice of America, you know.
Yeah. And the bricks were actually made here. It looks like it was a southern mansion, but the bricks were
Yeah.
actually made here in the Yarralumla Brickworks. Yeah.
If I
Well,
ever
one of
get
the
too
best things the
homesick,
US
I go
did
there.
actually was at Russell offices where our Australian Defence Forces are headquartered. The Americans put a eagle on a column in it as a gift to which is still there, the American
Mm.
eagle, and it was almost like we're just keeping an eye on you, and making sure you do what you're told.
Uh, so along with that being your background growing up in Canberra, being a Canberran, did you had interest in sport and that?
Yeah, I played a lot of sport.
Yeah,
That's what I
you
mainly
love
did.
rugby as well, right? Rugby
Yeah, I
union.
played like most people. We played rugby for our school on Saturday, and then you played rugby league on Sunday, and we
Mm,
played soccer, and I played Australian football for a while, basketball and hockey, and we played everything. Very
mm.
big sporting, and they say that Melbourne's the sporting capital of Australia, and I think it's actually the sport watching capital of Australia. I think the
Yes, yeah.
actual sporting capital of Australia is really Canberra in participation rates. The
Mm,
kids, like every kid, plays sport here, pretty much.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't sound like you were raised in church. Were you raised in any sort of
No,
church or?
well, my mother, she was a believer. I didn't actually know that.
Mm,
When when they emigrated to Canberra, she went. They're from England, so she went to the Church of England here, and apparently it was too high church for her.
uh,
So in the Anglicans, they have the high church, which is basically the Catholic Church, really,
mhm,
and with a different pope, if you like. But it was too high church so she didn't like it. So they actually went to the only other church which was there, which was a Salvation Army church with my sisters.
mm,
But then that's when we lived on the south side when I was first born. But then they moved to the north side into the family home, and moved away from that church, so she didn't go to church. But during her time, she had 6 children. I was the youngest, and she became unwell. Apparently, I was a child, so I don't remember it. And she had to go into hospital. And at that time, and she had no family here at all. Nobody,
mm,
just 6 kids, and a husband who was in the police force. And at that time, the Church of Christ apparently used to do visitation in the hospital, and they met her in the hospital, found out this, and they took all us kids in and looked after us, and
Wow.
became our, the lady became our Auntie Pat
Mm.
thereafter. And so I think in return or in payment for that, we were sent to Church of Christ Sunday School until we went to high school. We had to attend Sunday school, and which we did, but like most kids at high school, stopped going to Sunday school. And then I went for a little while in my teens. I went to the Uniting Church on the north side for a while, for a year or so. But that was really all. Although if I look back, I see God was working on me all that time anyway. I distinctly remember in primary school getting a Gideon's Bible. They came to the school and they handed out the Bibles. And I remember reading it, getting that Bible and reading it for all the time for quite a while. And other things happened, they had I was drawn towards God. And then after I got married, we had a couple of children, and my eldest daughter, she had had night terrors, and it was a very difficult time for us at that time. She basically would wake up screaming 3 or 4 times. Well, she didn't wake up. She would have screaming attacks 3 or 4 times every single night, and they're not actually awake. And when you go into the room, you become part of the nightmare, extreme nightmares, and they're running around and smashing stuff, and it was awful. It was and at the same time, we were in our first home, and a month after we bought the home, we had our second child, and so Debbie wasn't working, and then 6 months later, we had the recession we had to have, the government said, and our mortgage rate went to 18.5%. So people who today are paying 3%, can you imagine if you had to pay 18.5%? So there was a huge financial pressure on us at the same time.
Yeah.
And so it was a very difficult time. And anyway, my wife, she went back to work, and she was working at the Australian National University at the credit union there. And one of the ladies at the credit union said, "Can my pastor come and pray for you, for your daughter?" And they did, and it was Bishop John Downs and Sue Downs. They came. I wasn't there. They came and prayed for my daughter, and she slept through the night that night, and she slept through the following night, and she slept through the following night. And from that, my wife started to attend Calvary Chapel. She'd never been in any other church before in her life. Never.
Oh, wow. So she had no background in faith at all.
No background, and this is the only church she's ever attended.
Wow.
So she came here. That would have been in 1984 that she started coming here. And out of that little credit union university, the woman who asked her if her pastor would pray was Sue Serranos.
Yeah.
And her workmates also came. Zami Crowley, Robin Morris, and Debbie York came out of that one little office.
Wow. One
little credit union. Anyway, she started coming. She came regularly with the kids. I didn't come at all. But then with all the pressures and so on, we decided we were having marital problems with the financial pressures and so on. I was in the police force. I was a policeman at that time, and I came to the realization that I wanted to be married, which is seems like an odd thing to say, but that actually changed everything. When I decided that the most important thing was to save our marriage, everything else didn't matter anymore. So I resigned that's why I left the police. The shift work and so on was just too hard on us. And we sold our house, which we walked away with nothing after years of saving a deposit and so on. And we moved to Queensland. We moved to Brisbane for a while. And things didn't work out so well, unfortunately, in Brisbane, but we needed to get away. We did that. We came back, and that stopped my wife going to church all that period. That kind of stopped her going to church. And especially when we moved away, that was that. And then eventually we moved back to Canberra, and then she kind of had a desire to go back to church, but it took really the visit of Sister Helen Cole was coming, and she loved Sister Cole. And so that brought her back to church, and she started coming back to church again. And I still hadn't been to church, but then I was led by.
Do you know why you're like so resistant? The only reason I'm asking that is because you were the one that actually had a background in faith. Like you're the one that went to Sunday
Yeah,
school.
I think
You had read
when
the
I look back at it,
Bible.
I think the reality was I knew that I couldn't be like, I had to make a choice. I
Mm,
couldn't do half the world and half the church. I
right.
had to, and if I was going to start going to church, then I had to. That meant a lot of other things as well.
Mm.
I had
So
to
because
change.
of that background in that belief, like understanding the scriptures and what's taught, you knew that there was a bit more involved with
Yes,
taking that
exactly.
step. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. It wasn't just a, getting some help and making you feel better. There's a whole lot
Yeah.
more to it than
Mm.
that. But anyway, they didn't know. My kids used to go to the altar and pray for me, apparently, but they didn't know that. God, I'd go. They'd invite me to Sunday school presentations. I'd come to that,
Hmm.
and I'd just sit there and watch. And they didn't realise what was happening inside me at the time, even though I looked like I wasn't interested. And but anyway, then they had a visiting the very first Australian evangelist. Well, he wasn't Australian. Brother James D.L. George came, and they invited me to a men's breakfast, which I went to. And when he ministered, that really spoke to me. And then the next day, I said to Debbie, "I'm coming to church with you," which gave her a shock to her. Like she was shocked. She didn't want to say anything just in case, So I came to church. So I came to church. And then I went to the altar. I got the Holy Spirit when I went to the altar. So I got baptized. And so that was 9 years after my wife started coming to church that
Wow.
I actually came. And like I knew as soon as that, I was converted, if you like. I was born again. So that's where it was. I've been walked in God's way ever since, because
Mm.
once I'd made a decision, then I had to follow what was right after that.
Yeah. Once you'd made up your mind, it was like, the path, the course was set.
Yeah, and that's what took so long. Really, was the coming to the point where that was that I had to do
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Often people like experience that whilst attending, like they start attending for a little bit and they're still like kind of, I don't know if I want to fully commit to this.
Yeah.
And then they do that. It seems like a lot of that for you was taking place prior to
Yes.
actually walking through the doors.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of that was happening like if I ever came to a Sunday school presentation or something. So I only would have come once a year or something for that.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I could see why Sister Downs has always been so big about those Sunday school presentations and the children's choir and all of that.
Yeah.
It's just another excuse to get parents in the building.
Yes, that's true. It is. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, I like to ask everyone who comes on the podcast, when did you feel the call to ministry? You're heavily involved in ministry, the assistant pastor at Calvary Chapel. You're on you're on the executive board of Australia. But when did you first feel that call?
That's very hard to pinpoint, really. It was more like a progressive thing, and as I just determined that I'd do what I could.
Mm.
And if I was asked to do something, I'd do it, even if I really didn't know what I was doing. I'd do what I could to learn. For example, I was made the church treasurer. I had never done any finances or anything, treasuring or anything like that.
Oh,
So I
wow.
then taught myself how to use the accounting system and taught myself about bookkeeping and all that kind of stuff. And it was the same with ministry. I just started getting, things I'd like to say to people.
Mm-hmm.
Not a full sermon or anything like that, just, some thoughts that I could share with someone and stuff like that. And God kind of leads you, what you're going to be doesn't appear at the beginning.
Yeah.
If you just accept the opportunities that he gives you, then he leads you to a place he has for you, I think.
Yeah. Is
That's
that the
kind of
advice?
for me.
Is that the advice that you would give someone who's feeling the call to ministry, or what further
Yeah,
advice would you
absolutely.
give?
I think you need to take the opportunities God gives you because he has a reason for them,
Mm.
he prepares you for what's ahead, and it's a big step to go into pastoral, pulpit ministry, and we really need training and experience before that, but it's not the way we think it'll happen. God uses
Yeah.
other ways to give us what we need in training, I think.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. It's not always it's like it's almost like the path of the Israelites to the promised
Exactly.
land.
It's not a linear progression in
Exactly.
any shape or form at all. Yeah.
And if you try and make it that way, it tends to not work out so well for you.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing, of course, I always say, if you want something done, give it to someone who's already doing something.
Mm.
Because if they're doing nothing, you give them the job, they won't do it. Won't get done, won't get finished. But if they're already about doing stuff, they're the right person for another job.
Yeah, yeah. That's something that I've been talking about recently when it comes to, walking in the call of God and doing something for the kingdom of God. God tends to talk to the people that say yes, or the
That's
people that
true.
are willing to walk through the doors. He opens more doors.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's almost
yeah.
like a snowball effect. But
I used to get nearly all my all my messages when I was mowing the lawn because
mm,
it's a big. Well, it's not such a big block now because it's covered in building. But in those days, we had a little church building and a lot of lawn, and it used to take me 6 hours to mow it.
oh
And
wow,
so, or if the ride-on worked, well, the ride-on didn't often work. It'd take about half that. But that's when God used to talk to me and you
mm.
know give me speak to me. Yeah,
Yeah, there's definitely an illustration in that. It's in the doing, it's in the working that God speaks. It's good. So you're the secretary treasurer of the UPCA, and
yeah,
it was interesting for you to mention that you didn't have a background in finance because you're so heady about it. You're so knowledgeable. I just assumed that you had that
I remember
formal
Brother
training.
Glass asked me when, and he was when I he asked me, and when did you do an accountancy degree or something? I'm not an accountant. I don't know, but you got to know it's like in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. I'm not an accountant, and when I deal with the real accountants, I know how much I don't know.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, fair enough. Yeah. So you've been very influential in the development of the systems of the national church, even prior to being on the executive board. You're involved with that, and I mentioned already you're the assistant pastor of Calvary Chapel in Canberra. How have you been able to strike a balance between life and ministry? I like to ask this question to people who find themselves
yeah.
busy about the things of God.
Um, when I I think earlier on I didn't do so well. To be honest, I thought I was um, giving proper attention to my family and so on. But I remember one of my daughter said to me, "You treat other people better than you do with us. You're more patient with them than
Mm,
you are with us," and that really cut me. And I thought she's right.
yeah.
That's true. And I do regret that I didn't neglect them, but they weren't the number one. They should have been a more of a priority, I think. And I was thinking about this. Jesus said that you to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And to me, the heart that means your emotional well-being, and your soul obviously is your spiritual well-being. Your mind is your mental well-being, and your strength is your physical well-being. And so we need to make sure that we address all those issues. That we're spiritually healthy is important, but we also need to be mentally healthy and emotionally healthy. And so I try and have rest. You need time to rest and recuperate. You just can't keep going forever. So I try and incorporate breaks. I try and invest in my marriage by taking my wife away when we
Mhm.
can, things like that. And just try and realize that some things are not urgent. I
Yeah.
don't. Some things I don't have to do at the time. So I like to, when it's just like office work, I try and keep office hours,
Mhm.
which is not always possible. It's not obviously when there's meetings and things we can't. And the other thing is, of course, a lot of our ministry volunteers, so they've got secular jobs, so they can't deal with you except at night and so on.
Mhm.
But have had to learn that I don't have to address everything immediately. I can put things off to the next day and things like that. And I try and be more aware of my family life and my mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah, I think that's tremendous advice. And I remember it was a number of years ago now, but I think someone had made a comment, or I heard it somewhere. I can't exactly remember, but they're talking about talking to your spouse or your family the way that you would, talk to someone at church, or a casual acquaintance. Like you treat them nicer than you treat your own family at times.
Yeah.
And as you said, sometimes they're more patient with people you don't really know than with people you do know. And
Yeah.
being aware of that, I think is so important. Think about that the next time you have, you might get in an argument or whatever. Just think about, hey, what did I bring to the table? Am I not being, aware of their needs or whatnot? Am I just talking to them because I'm familiar with them?
I overheard some. They might watch it. I overheard some ladies talking about single women, unmarried women. I overheard them talking about their future husband, their requirements list for their future husbands. He's going to this, and he's going to this, and he's going to this. And I remember thinking, you're not saying much about what your demands on yourself are going to be and what you're going to bring to this relationship. And I think that's you're going to be. That's why you're single, I think. But it's the same, I think, with our relationship with God. We often have expectations of Him when really our expectation and our focus should be upon our attitude and our what we do, what can we bring. And I think it's the same for the family. It's the same all relationships. The church, it's not what are they going to have to do, it's how am I going to respond to what they do, and how am I, regardless of what they do, what am I going to do? How am I going to behave, and what's my attitude going to be like? And so I try and focus more upon myself than the others if I can, but it's not always.
Yeah,
I don't always succeed, but I try.
yeah, we're not perfect, but you change what you can, and it's a lot easier for you to change yourself if you
can't
need
change
changing.
anybody else.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have any further tips on time management? Because you're quite impressive as far as how quickly you respond to emails and how you're on top of things, that sort of thing.
Well, that's one thing I found. I think some pastors do make some mistakes when it comes to like, I suppose, what you call admin work. And I think first of all, I think they don't understand the importance of it to the health of the church. But we all know that if the longer you put something off, the bigger job it becomes, and the quicker you can deal with it, it's finished then, and it just, and then if you let it ride, and it just becomes more harder and harder and harder and harder to fix, and it becomes more of a pressure upon you, or worry to you, and all that kind of stuff. So I do try and keep things, if I can deal with them, deal with it. If you can do it now, let's do it now and get it, and then it's done, if I can. And even when it comes to like paying, we when we did our extension here, we built our education centre here in the church in 2017, and the builders loved us because they'd give us a monthly progress invoice, and I'd pay them immediately, and they're not used to that, they're used to the last minute. But the scripture tells you, if you've got the money, you owe money and you have it, give it to them. Don't make them wait for it. And I told them that's why I pay. And I think that's the same with time management. If you can do it now, and it's done, and it's much less work.
Have you heard of that? There's a book. I don't know how popular it is. It might be a bit obscure, but the title of it is "Eat That Frog," or something along those lines. It basically, the premise of the book is that you accomplish the hard tasks first.
Yeah.
And like the one you're wanting to put off. And I found that to be so true, especially at admin work.
Agree.
Like if there's something that has been weighing on you and you keep avoiding it, the day you actually get in first thing in the morning, you address that. Or, if you're bivocational, whenever you get that time to work,
Yep.
you address that straight away. It's like a
Yep.
weight lifted off your shoulders.
I
You know?
agree. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That I agree with that. Some don't always do it, but that's what I think is right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm good at giving advice. I don't always follow exactly what advice.
I sometimes think that that's my spiritual calling is to give advice.
You've touched on it a little bit with what you think some churches get wrong when it comes to administration. Is there anything else there, or and then tied to that, what are some things that we should focus on as a church when it comes to administration?
Yeah. When you look at the successful churches, they have good admin, and for a church to grow, I think a whole lot of things have to work together.
Mm-hmm.
A whole lot of areas have to be good, and a whole lot of it's never really one person, although there would be one person can make a significant difference, but it's a whole lot of people doing their part and being the body, And with admin, I think if you neglect that, it shows to the visitor. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah, no, I understand.
If a visitor comes to the church, I want them to have the best experience possible, and I want them to look upon us as people that they can trust. And we know that the way people, just one example, the way people decide whether to trust people is what they do with money.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you show yourself to be faithful with money, then the people are more likely to trust you with things that are really important. That's scriptural. Who's going to trust you the true riches if you can't be faithful with the unrighteous mammon? Mm. And so if you don't care for your admin, I think it's showing the people that you don't that you leave some things, let things go. You don't, if you know what I mean. You don't cover the important stuff. And if we can get that support, if the admin is a facilitator, if things run smoothly and well, it means that all the ministry can build on that, and it can support it without there being a fall. If you haven't got the admin in place, the ministry is restricted to what the admin can support, I think. And
right.
The better admin we have, generally, it's all part of being a well-run church that people see that they and see that they can trust, and also it leaves the ministry of music and preaching and Bible studies. They can then they don't have to make up the gap that's been shortfall of the admin, and that leaves them free to minister. And I think it's to me, I think you have to have integrity. Obviously, you have to be. If people find out that you are lacking in integrity, you'll never get their trust again.
Yeah,
you have to.
Before you move off that, I do want to touch on it, because I think that what you're mentioning there is so good, especially right now in today's environment. Trust in institutions, trust in government. I know trust in government is not so low here in Australia, but around the world, there's a lack of trust in government.
Yeah, some of it's not as bad as some places, but even so, it's increasing here, no doubt about it. And trust in institutions is at an all-time low. And I think that's a lot of the issues that we have with young people in our society, is that the things that brought them meaning and that they could rely upon, they're now not sure of, and they leaves them a bit lost and wondering where they are, what to do. So
and they're not trusting media, they're not trusting, and so if we're able to be that sort of haven, that area where they can commit their trust, they do find a place. Hey, this is somewhere that I can put my trust in. This is a system. This is a church. This is a group of believers that they mean what they say and they do it.
One little thing we did, which is only minor, we started putting the amount of last week's offering in the bulletin, and people and you'd be amazed how many people come and go, I've never at churches, I've never done that, but we say, well, we want to be transparent. We want you. We want to show you, and that's why we're also big advocates of anyone. If you think this church is your spiritual home, you come to our annual general meeting. You don't have to be a member, a legal member, or any of that kind of stuff. Come, because we want you to see that we are open, transparent, and accountable.
Yeah,
and if you can trust us with your money and with the physical things, that will make you more likely to trust us with your soul, which is the most valuable thing that you own.
That's the most valuable thing, yeah. That offering figure that you guys put out, is that inclusive of online? So is that like, that's everything that comes in that week? Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm just thinking about that because we might start doing something similar here at the POS. Is a great idea. Was there anything else that we should focus on in that area, or that you haven't even touched on?
I know I talked about successful churches having good admin. I've seen some churches that don't grow, and I feel that they're like kind of almost secretive about things. They don't keep their people informed. They don't want them to know how much money comes in and goes out. They don't want them to know what happens in that kind of side of things. And I think they're actually doing themselves a disservice. And I think that's the reason why that can be a reason why a church doesn't seem to grow, because there's the people don't trust it.
Yeah, true. Well, I wanted to ask you this question. I think it's good because you lead at a number of different levels. You lead at your local church, you lead in the national church, and then you lead across administrative type roles, but also teaching ministry, preaching ministry. What is one piece of advice that you would share with a church leader? Could be any type of church leader, but what is some advice that you would give them?
Use what you've got, I think. And I think that applies on a personal level. What has God gifted you with? And he's given you that for a purpose, and you need to find a way to use that gifting, whether it doesn't necessarily mean a ministry gifting, what we normally consider a ministry gifting, like preaching or teaching or music, but whatever gifting you have, let's use it for the kingdom. But I also think that applies to leaders as well, because I think if God gives us something, we should use it. And it's easy for us to look out and think we need more people, we need more talented people, we need more resources, we need more money, we need more. Well, let's look at what we've got. What have you got in your hand? Let's use that. And I think of that. When David, when he was chased out of the palace by King Saul, and he went and ended up in a cave after going to Gath. He ended up in a cave, and he prayed for God to send him people to worship, that they could worship together. He didn't pray for revenge on his enemies. He prayed for people to come and join him in worship. And he wrote that psalm, let us exalt the Lord together. And so the scripture says that God sent them everyone who was discontented, who was in debt, and I can't remember what the third one is, discontent, in debt. Anyway, all the ones that had trouble everywhere else, ones that weren't happy where they were, everybody that had nothing to offer because they were in debt, that's all the people God sent him. And if it was me, I'd think, God, can you send some people that, that can help me in this, build this up, instead of, can you send some people to this church that can play the guitar, or that can tithe a lot, or can, preach? Don't send me the people that have problems, because that's what we've got. And yet, not long after that, God lists them. They're called David's mighty men.
Yeah.
And so because he used what God had given him, those people grew and developed and became mighty in God's kingdom and in his kingdom. And I think as leaders, we need to use what God's given us in our hand, and let's see what they can become. Let's have a hand in seeing people grow into their calling.
Yeah, that's so good because it can apply to you personally, what God has given you, the talents, abilities He's given you, but also the manpower or the people around you that He's gifted you with.
Yeah. When we're talking about the talents, God gives some 5, God give one 2, and God give 1 according to their several ability.
Mm-hmm.
And you can look upon that, as a personal gifting or a personal talent that God's given you. But I think it can also look upon that as the being the pastors, and they're given people,
Mm-hmm.
and they're supposed to put those people to work in the marketplace to make more people, and so not bury them in the and hide them and just keep them safe until the master returns. But no, let's put them to work and let's use them.
Yeah, that's good. What excites you about the Australian church in 2023?
I think it's a really exciting time for us. So I've been in the UPCA since '93. That's when I got baptized in September '93, and so 30 years this year. And really, I feel like we're just seeing the fruit of all our labour, and I really I have a lot of respect for those who went before and they built us up to this place, this point now. But now we're seeing new churches opening, like not just one every so often here and there, but multiple churches, and we're seeing all these talented young people coming up now. My goodness, wish I was as smart and as talented as them when I was their age. But they're finding an opportunity, now. They're not being warehoused; they're being used. And the demographics of the church, we're getting such an influx of multicultural thing, and we're reflecting our society, and we're having a lot more engagement with our society, with our culture now, I think, and not compromising. And I see the church modernizing is a bad word, being the church for this time,
Right.
and it's after some of the, everyone goes through good and bad times, and they're walking but just at the moment, you just feel like we're really making progress at the moment. It's a very exciting time for us, I think.
Yeah, I get that feeling as well, and of course, off the back of the conference in January, it just really, I don't know, it just really felt like a lift. We'd gotten through that time, and we hadn't seen a reduction. We'd actually seen growth during that time, even though it was very difficult. But to be lifted and it is exciting.
I think it taught a lot of our churches. It certainly taught us that that we had to maintain contact and ministry. We still had to minister to people when we couldn't have face-to-face time, and we didn't have church services, and we still had to find a way. But more than just having a stream service, it was actually maintaining one-on-one personal contact with people. That made the difference, and it was almost forced us to do that. And that's why we're seeing, I think, such a growth in those churches that were able to maintain that personal contact through that time, and it's kind of changed the way we deal with people, I think.
Yeah. I like to ask this question to everyone who comes on the podcast. What is it that drives you when it comes to ministry? What is it that is that driving force for you?
I just want to do what God wants me to do. I just want to please Him. It's all, and really, I think it's important for us to really have God's kingdom as our goal, because it's so easy to get discouraged. It's so easy to, like, you step down from the pulpit and think, well, I'm never doing that again. I'm not getting up there anymore. But then, you get over it, suck your thumb for a while, and you recover, and you get back up there because that's what God wants me to do, And if it didn't have that confidence in his hand and his calling, then I would have stopped. I mean, it's much easier to work in the background and do the work and let other people do it. But if we can put the kingdom first, and that helps me then to look at the big picture too. When you're dealing with people and when you're getting our irritations and things that happen when you have groups of people together, then you can look at the big picture and look what's most important is to maintain our spiritual life and our also to love our neighbour as ourselves, to shed forth the love of God by the Holy Ghost in our hearts, and that kind of stops you getting beaten down too much, I think.
Yeah, it stops you from getting stuck in the mundane or things that don't really matter. Sometimes you can be drugged down in that in ministry, and you kind of lose sight of why you're doing it.
There's the always story about the grumpy admin guy, and that because people always won't do what they're so obvious for you to do, and you told them to do it, they don't do it, and it's easy to do, and you think, no, well, that's they're volunteers too for a start.
Yeah.
But it's not just that, but we've got to remember that we're supposed to love our neighbour as ourselves, and if I've made a mistake, I'd hope I get grace, and so therefore it's incumbent upon me to show that grace as well.
Yeah.
And patience. Yeah.
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Again, thank you so much for your time today, for setting aside coming on the podcast. I really do admire you and the work that you do, and as someone who does work in administration, it's you have been someone that I've looked at. I remember when Pastor first hired me on as full-time admins. At first, I was just doing a bit of internship, and then he hired me on as full-time admin, and he had just been elected pastor maybe like 6 months before that. And I remember the onboarding conversation was, Bishop Downs, he has Brother Kent. I want you to be like my Brother Kent. And I said, okay, well, I'll do my best. And you've been something that I've looked up to, and it's been a privilege to work alongside you this last couple of years. But I wanted you to be able to share your story here today and help guide us in areas that we might have some weakness. So thank you again for your time. I like to finish off these conversations by giving the guests an opportunity to share a closing word with the listeners, whatever you feel God's laid on your heart, bro. Thanks again.
In my daily devotion, I read a 1-year Bible, and I usually read a different translation each year. And just recently, I've been going in my 1-year Bible. You get a reading in the Old Testament and the New Testament and the Psalms and the Proverbs. And in the Old Testament, we've been in Exodus. The story of the Exodus. And I was thinking about that, and I thought, before God works through us, He has to work in us before He can use us. And what I mean by that, for example, is like Moses. He obviously knew that God had called him to deliver Israel out of Egypt. And so he went about it all wrong, and he killed an Egyptian and buried him in the sand. And from that he was forced to go out run off into the wilderness. And there he had to tend sheep for 40 years in the desert. And I thought, that's 40 years in the desert tending sheep in the wilderness, that was God working in him and preparing him to lead these other sheep also in the wilderness. The people that he had, because God had to change something in him to prepare him to actually lead the people out of Egypt into the promised land. And then it was really the same kind of thing for the people themselves. It wasn't just Moses. The people themselves also had to to have something happen in them before God could work through them. And it said I was reading the New King James Version at the moment this year in my one-year Bible, and in Exodus 13:17 it says this: "Then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go," so they've finally gone through the 10 plagues and the death of the firstborn and the Passover and so on, and Pharaoh decides to let the people go. When it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt. So when Pharaoh finally let God's people go, God said, they won't be able to face the Philistines. They won't be able to face the battle ahead. And so he said he led them in a roundabout way, I think it says in another translation, a roundabout way by the Red Sea. And they had to go and have their heart prepared for what God wanted them to do. So by the time, it took a long time, it took like, same as it did for Moses, it took 40 years really. And I know it's so the people of that generation who refused to go in, they'd passed away. But the people that were there, they had no training in battle. But by the time they got to face Jericho and the Philistines and so on, they were no longer people that would have turned back because they were afraid, because God had done something in them. And so that's just what I've been thinking lately. You know, we need to let God do something in us if we want God to do something through us. And we often pray for God to do things, and that's right and good. But I think we need to also pray, particularly, please do something in me, God. Make me ready. Prepare me and use me. Change my heart so you can use me for what you've called me to do. That's just the word I've been thinking today. Let God do something in you so you can do something through you.